Hello and welcome back to Jonah Olivarez' college football show. It is December 23rd. Happy birthday, Dad. It's my dad's birthday. Very excited. I'm not going to say how old he is for his sake, but I'm excited. We got another show for you. We have had a wonderful weekend of games. Well, a lot of people wouldn't really call it a wonderful weekend of games, but we've got a lot of things to talk about. And I'm actually going to start off with a little note on a bowl game that happened today. You might have gotten a chance to watch it. The Myrtle Beach Bowl, UTSA versus Coastal Carolina. UTSA ends up winning 44-16. Spoiler alert. But this game was, if you didn't catch up with UTSA, you might be a little surprised about what happened in this game. They kind of imposed their will on the ground, kind of what you would expect a high-level team to do against a lower-level team. But you might not have thought, because both these teams were 6-6. Well, 247 yards, 3 touchdowns, all a little bit pieced in by different rushers. There was no 100-yard rusher for UTSA today. But I wanted to speak about them because this team actually started 2-4. It's quite interesting that this team started 2-4, but they won 4 of their last 7 games, which you might be like, that's not that impressive. But those include 3 road games. The 3 losses are 3 road games where they lost by a combined 8 points. So all 3 games, they only lost by 8 points total. And one of them was on the road versus Army, who the next week went on to destroy Tulane in the American Athletic Conference Championship. And they only lost to Army by 5 points on the road. I just wanted to highlight UTSA. What a turnaround for them. I remember they're right here in this city. I'm in San Antonio right now, actually. And I've been to a couple of their games. I think I went to one this year specifically. I watched them play FAU, and I'm a real big fan of Jeff Traylor and what he does with his team. And so I just wanted to highlight them. What a turnaround for them. Start off 2-4. Really, it shows just the kind of nature of the program that they have, that you can have such a rough start with a game at UT and at Texas State. Actually, I don't even know if they played at Texas State, but they played against Texas State, their rival, and they lost both of those by a lot, which is not exactly what you want to see out of a Jeff Traylor UTSA team. But they figured it out. They know how to turn it around. They every game you watch from them, if you got a chance to watch them, they were leading in a lot of these road games too. They lost to Rice, and I believe, who else was the team they lost to? I believe Tulsa. They lost to Rice and Tulsa on the road by combined 3 points. And both of those games they had control of at some point, but they just kind of let up. And it was just kind of one of those seasons for them. But credit to Traylor, credit to the staff that he's got there, credit to the team, the players, for just not quitting. And they just look like the kind of team you don't want to play at any time. They can do what they did to Coastal Carolina today to anybody. Anybody at the G5 level, I would say, especially in the American. I think as long as Traylor's there, they're going to be a competitor in the American, even in this world of NIL, which it doesn't seem like they've adjusted to perfectly. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight them. It was a great story towards the end of the season. Like you said, like I said earlier, they almost beat Army on the road. Army was pretty good all year and only ended up losing to Navy and Notre Dame outside of the one game they barely won against UTSA. UTSA is one of the only teams to push them to the brink. So, yep. That was the Myrtle Beach Bowl today. Coastal Carolina kind of ends their season. Not exactly how they'd want to, but yeah. So those were not the only games that happened before I went live today. Over the weekend, we had the first week of the college football playoff, the inaugural home field games for the first ever 12-team college football playoff, and a lot of people had a lot of ideas. A touch on the overall CFP Discord. There's a lot of people saying that this is wrong, that there shouldn't have been this weekend, but I strongly disagree. I think that this is exactly what it needed to be. I don't necessarily care that SMU got blown out or that all the teams got blown out for that matter. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm glad that they all got a chance to go prove that they belonged, and they proved they didn't, but they got a chance. And I think that's what the playoffs should be about. I remember growing up, I was always so weirded out by why do only 2 teams get to play for the national championship and they're just voted on, like they just get invited. I always wondered. I was like, I remember I would tell my dad, if Rice, I'm from Texas, so Rice is a small school that doesn't really play too many people too many years. If Rice went 12-0, would they even get a chance at the national championship? They went 13-0, won their conference title. Would they get a chance at the national title? Well, before this year, I don't think they would have. They could have been the best team in the country, and they wouldn't have gotten a chance to prove that. And I think now, with the landscape of the college football playoff, I think it gives everybody a chance, and I'm happy about that. I think that's what the playoff should be. I think that's what it needs to be, and yeah. So let's review the games from this weekend. To start off, we're going to talk about Notre Dame.
They move a lot. They talk about disguising their fronts. Leonard, bat into the air, intercepted! Picked off by D'Angelo Pons! And Indiana gets the first takeaway of the night. Wow, what a catch. They go quickly from the 17-yard line. That one's intercepted! Picked off by Xavier Watts!
Just barely missed the mark on that one. They still won by 10 points, but it was just barely over 24. So I'm very... Oh. Yes, producer? Is everything all right? I've got my producer telling me that I need to repeat everything I've said. So yeah, just as I was saying, Notre Dame versus Indiana was actually the closest game of the weekend. Pretty exciting. Well, actually, there was really no point where it was a close game outside of the very beginning, right when Indiana gets the interception and Notre Dame gets the interception back, and then they get the ball back to Indiana. And honestly, when I thought that when Indiana got the ball, or I don't know if they they threw the pick or it was like on the 2-yard line. I was like, oh man, the way this game is going, this might be a rough spot for Notre Dame. This could be a spot for Indiana to get a safety or something like that, because I thought that this was going to be that type of game. And then Jeremiah Love just breaks off a 98-yard touchdown run. Oh my gosh. That was great. And that kind of set the tone for Notre Dame for the rest of the game. They end up running over what was a really solid Indiana run defense. And there's not too much to say. I'm not trying to spend too many times on each individual games because we also want to preview each of the other ones. But yeah, I mean, Notre Dame, Indiana. Any last thoughts? I think this is a really big win for that coaching staff at Notre Dame. I think there's a lot of things that they can take from this. Now, we'll see. They were expected to win this game, but we'll see if they can carry this momentum into a good performance versus Georgia. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And for Indiana, you kind of just got exposed, and it's not your fault that you had an easy schedule this year. I'm glad you made the playoffs. You deserve to. But now it's really just how can you go up from here? I mean, you started off your first season with Signetti really strong. Didn't end the way you wanted it to, but 11-2 is your first season with a coach. That's pretty good. I don't think too many teams would be mad about that, and so I think it's a good way to start off a coaching career for Signetti at Indiana, and we'll see what he can do. All right, the next game of the playoffs, Saturday morning's 11 a.m. kickoff. That was not SMU at Penn State. This game ended up being it's funny that this was the game I picked to be an upset because this was the biggest blowout of the weekend by 3 points over the one on the nightcap. I have a little bit of frustration about this game only because SMU came out ready. They came out excited. They came out ready to go offensively. They moved the ball so good on their first drive, and yet Kevin Jennings just had an all-time stinker, and you feel bad for the guy. He is a fighter. He's a great player. He's very talented. It just was not his day, and that's just going to happen sometimes when you're playing one of the best defenses in the country. on that fourth down, if he just has to decide if he wants to run for it. If he wants to run for it, he has it. If he wants to throw for it, he has it. The receiver was wide open. He just kind of couldn't decide, and so he ends up throwing it, and it's just not enough, and he throws a pick. Oh, no, he doesn't throw a pick, and he's just throwing behind him, and he ends up missing him. And that's just because he tried to rush the throw. And sometimes that happens. You're just so excited that you try to get that ball right to him immediately, but it ends up making you miss the ball. So, and from there, they had a couple opportunities, but it never really felt the same, and he just struggled the rest of the game. It's just one of those really unfortunate games because I still think a lot of people will say that game was not close and that it shouldn't have been close. I still think SMU, if they don't make those mistakes, which are not entirely uncharacteristics, they've had turnover problems all year. So it's not necessarily saying that it's unrepresentative of who they are as a team, but if they just could fix that a little bit, I think this was a close game. I think I still don't know if they win, but the reasons that I thought they could have won were there, and I really think that in another world where Kevin Jennings is maybe a little calmer and ready for the moment, that it becomes an SMU story. And so for Penn State, good win, exactly what you needed. Your offense kind of struggled at the beginning, but your defense picked up all the slack, got 2 scores before anything even happened. It's exactly what you needed to carry yourself, the way you needed to carry yourself in this first round. We're supposed to win. I mean, they were supposed to win. A lot of people thought they might win big time, and they did exactly that. And they're looking at this game against Boise State, and there's a lot of pressure still on Penn State because they're expected to win. I think they like that. I think they don't dodge the pressure, and I think that's good. If you looked at the way they played, you wouldn't necessarily be inspired. I think you would be more disappointed in the way SMU played this game than excited about the way Penn State played this game, outside of obviously the defense. And what was that kid's name? The linebacker that got he just got the pick six. He got one of the pick sixes. He was playing so well. Outside of them, I think that you had some things to be desired in this game, but I think overall, it's exactly what you needed, and there's nothing to be upset about. There's really no reason to see this as any sort of negative. I feel like I've seen some people talk about that. But, yeah, there's not really any thing I could take away from this game overall. I feel like Penn State is exactly the team I thought they were before. But, yeah, I think that with this upcoming matchup, you're going to figure out not that much more about them, to be completely honest, whether they win or lose. But we'll see about that in a little bit. The next game that we had was the game, the Clemson versus Texas game, or Clemson at Texas game. And this was the closest game of the weekend. I see some people talking about how this was not a close game. I thought this was a close game. When Clemson comes back from down 31-7, I'm actually not entirely sure that was the score, but they were down by a lot. And they came back, and they pulled it within 7, 31-24. And at that point, you're thinking, man, can Dabble make the magic happen? Are these the cardiac Clemson Tigers? And Texas was just slightly better, and they ended up scoring right after that to get the 38, which was, it was kind of that moment where you're just like, dang, like the whole game is building up, and you're like, oh my gosh, can Clemson, can they come back? Can they come back? Can they come back? And then Texas gets that huge run after Clemson brings it within 7, and it's just a big sigh down. And that was the game. I think this game proved to me more about Georgia than it did about Texas, because last week we saw Texas could not, or not last week, 2 weeks ago, we saw that Texas could not run the ball on the Georgia defense. They were getting stuff, they were getting thrown back. They had a lot of issues, but today they had this weekend they had 200-yard rushers for the first time in like 5 years or something like that, which is really good. And against a pretty good defense in Clemson, I mean, it's not a world beater, but you're going to get a disciplined, you're going to get good D linemen. That's just Clemson. And so I think with Texas, you saw the running game you needed to, which is exactly what you were wondering if was a Georgia-specific problem or was a Texas overall problem. And it looks like it's just a Georgia problem. And we'll see if they get the chance to play Georgia again. They might have to play Oregon. Who knows if they'll even get through Arizona State. You never know. But with that, I think I'm a little bit more confident. I'll probably talk about that a little bit more in Georgia's segment. But yeah, I think you didn't really see what you wanted to out of Quinn Ewers. And the Texas DBs, they did not have a good game. I think Cade Klubnik had an amazing game. Speaking about Clemson, Cade Klubnik had an amazing game. He was everything you kind of wanted him to be before, he became this kind of meme of a quarterback. I feel like people meme him a lot, but he kind of was a serious quarterback on Saturday. And I mean, if you wanted a performance from a guy that would go and win you a game, it was that performance. It just wasn't enough because Texas was the better team. And I really think that overall, like, none of these games have any effect to me as to whether or not these teams belonged in the playoffs. I feel like, if anything, Clemson proved they belonged in the playoffs. They went on the road against a really strong Texas team, one that a lot of teams haven't had a lot of success against, and they played, I wouldn't say up to par, but they played a solid game, and they had the offense. They had enough offense to keep it interesting for a little bit. They had enough defense to not get blown out of the water before the game was even over, or before the game could even begin, even though it kind of felt like that at one point, because Texas kind of took their foot off the gas once they were up. But I wouldn't be mad if I'm the Clemson Tigers with this performance. I think I'd be pretty honest about the situation that you had to go into, and you'd be pretty happy with the result that you got. So yeah, I think my MVP of the weekend for any of the losing teams is definitely going to be Klubnik. I think I'm also putting a big respect to Dabo, who just got his first 2 transfer portal recruits. I think we'll see what Clemson makes of the next years, because I think Dabo Swinney still got it. If he's the one coach that looked like he had a team that could compete this weekend, outside of the fact that they were outmatched overall. And so, yeah. So I think that this matchup makes me a little nervous for my prediction of Texas over Arizona State, because I think I saw what I needed to from Texas. But also, I won't talk about that too much because I'll get into that later. But yeah, so the next game, actually the final one,
Wear and tear reduced.
weekend, was the nightcap, the Ohio State Buckeyes hosting the Tennessee Volunteers. And this one, oh my gosh, this one had a lot riding on it. If you were on Twitter at all this weekend, from the time between the midway point of the Notre Dame-Indiana game, well, actually not even the midway point, like the end of the first quarter of the Notre Dame-Indiana game, and before the Tennessee-Ohio State game begun, if you're on Twitter at all, the entire narrative was everybody sucks, none of them deserve to be in. You should have put the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th SEC team in, at least from a category of people. There was a group of them, or the 4th, 5th, that said that because of the results of the game. And you saw Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin is a hilarious guy, on Twitter at least. You saw Lane Kiffin tweeting how exciting the games were, and you saw Paul Feinbaum tweeting how exciting the games were. I think that their judgment of the games is misplaced, because the point is not the quality of product, like the closeness of a game. It's like the reason you have a national championship playoff is to find the best team. And when you're finding the best team and you're comparing conferences with different strengths. Like, of course, I think the SEC is stronger on average than any of the other conferences. But I do think that if you're looking for, if you're looking for a national championship, you're not necessarily concerned with finding the fifth or sixth best team in a conference. You're finding the best teams from each of the conferences, and you're putting them against each other to see what that looks like, and whether or not, like let's say, for example, Arizona State. Maybe Arizona State's one of the best teams in the country, but they just played in the Big 12, and so you would never know, or at least you would never assume. But that takes us all to this game, where, oh my gosh, Ohio State receivers absolutely torched the Tennessee Volunteers DBs. And if you look at Tennessee's schedule, you could make the argument that they were a little fraudulent. They had a little bit of an easier path to the playoff. A lot of people talked about Texas' schedule. Tennessee didn't have that much harder of a schedule. And the games that were harder, they lost or barely won. I think they played I know they played Georgia and they lost like pretty bad, and they played Bama and they won by a touchdown at home, which if you're thinking about it, you're like, okay, that's not, that's kind of to be expected. Like, I mean, they beat Bama, but like if you think about it in retrospect, you might say this team was not as strong as we thought. And this was the third best team in the SEC. I would say a lot of people were pretty confident about how good Tennessee was coming out of the SEC. But of course, at this point, any of these teams have flaws. Any of these teams in this first round were going to have flaws, and you saw Tennessee's flaws in broad daylight. They were outmatched on the edge. They were their defense, which is usually really, really good, just couldn't keep up, and their offense, which has had struggles throughout the year, barely showed up to play at all. And I think Tennessee is going to get a lot of hate because of the discourse between the conferences, but I don't really think that they deserve it. I think that they deserve to be there. I think that what we learned this weekend was what we already knew, which was that it's really difficult to go on the road and beat a quality team at any point in the season, especially late in the year, when these teams get a week to, they get 2 weeks to prepare for you. I mean, you're going to get a team's best, and at least for the most part. And I mean, Tennessee couldn't handle Ohio State's best, and not many teams could, for that matter. So I think this is not what you wanted if you're a Tennessee fan. You won a national championship. But, I mean, you got your foot in the door. Let's see how Josh Heupel and his team and Nico can build off this playoff appearance and see if they can keep getting better. And who knows, maybe they'll come back next year and they'll find a way to win the whole thing. So that was the playoffs for this weekend. I thought it was exciting. I was happy. I was excited, even though I wanted every single underdog to win. Well, I guess that's wrong. I wanted every team I picked to win because I wanted to be right. But I secretly want every single underdog to win because that's just fun. And it was nowhere close. And the SMU game was tragic. My dad, I was hanging out with him, and he was like, "Are you watching them, expecting them to do something because that game's over?" And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." I put down my phone, which was a little bit of a realism shake to me. But we've got another week of college football to look forward to, on top of bowl games, which won't really start up until after Christmas. We've got the New Year's 6 playoff games. Oh, no. Well, it's the first round of the bowl site playoff games, the second round of the overall playoffs. And I'm going to do a quick preview of each of these games. We're going to start with Texas at Arizona State. This one's a little difficult for me because I picked Arizona State, but I think the Texas receivers have a huge advantage versus the Arizona State DBs. There's a world where I think that maybe the Texas offense still just doesn't do what they can, which it feels like they haven't. So it's not like it's impossible, but I feel like the receivers of Texas have all the talent that they can just go win. And I feel like that's what you need in the playoffs. You need receivers who can just go win. And I think that's going to be where the game is decided for the most part. I think Arizona State's not bad in run defense, and so that means that the linchpin of this game is going to be, well, of course, every matchup matters, but of course, the Texas offense and their ability to throw the ball is going to be the main difference in whether or not UT can kind of impose their will. Because if they can throw the ball, that's going to open up the running game. And if when they start running, they start throwing, they can score real quick and they can score a lot of points. And if Arizona State can't keep up, can't keep them off the field, then it could get ugly really quick. But speaking of Arizona State, Scattaboo has to have a good game, of course. And he's going up against a pretty stout Texas defense, pretty stout Texas run defense specifically. Of course, he needs to have a big game, but I think that he could have a big game and they could still lose by a good amount just because of that mismatch, I think, on the back end for the Arizona State defense. I think that there's been a lot of people who have thought that they were going to wrap Scattaboo up. I'm a little nervous that he's going to get wrapped up, but it just seems like he keeps running through everybody who think they're going to wrap him up. And when you got a guy like that who just doesn't care what the name says across your jersey, doesn't care what the logo is on the side of your helmet, he just cares that he's better than you, I think he can do pretty much anything at that point. And you got another guy in Ashton Junty who can also do that as well. And we'll talk about him a little bit later. But I think Leavitt versus this Texas secondary is going to be really important to take some pressure off of Scattaboo. And I think Leavitt is up to the challenge. I think he's a solid player. I don't necessarily know if this is the best spot for him. I think it's a really good secondary. I think there were better or there were worse units that they could have matched up against. But this is just what you're going to get. If you're going to play in the playoffs, you're going to have to beat a good team. So, yeah. So that's the first game of it's basically, I'm going in bracket order. So that's the top game on this bracket, and we're going to go down to the next one, which should be Ohio State Oregon. Man, my main question for this game is, will Ohio State play like Ohio State? Because if you want Ohio State versus Michigan, Ohio State, I don't think they're going to do very well this weekend or come New Year's Day. But if you want Ohio State versus anybody else, essentially, then they've got to – I mean, I'm kind of scared because I picked Oregon to win the national title, and I am fearful that these Ohio State Buckeyes might make me regret that decision because of the way they played this last week. I think there was something in that air after being doubted for 2 weeks that just made the game easy for them. It seemed like they loved it. They were like, oh my gosh, we don't have to be Ohio State this week because there's so many people who already kind of expect that we're going to fail and that Tennessee's going to come in and shut us down and that, the volunteer fans are going to come and they're going to, invade our stadium. But that didn't happen. They imposed their will and they looked like the far better team. And I think if I'm Oregon, I'm a little scared because Will Howard looked pretty good. Jeremiah Smith looked pretty good. Defensively, they gave problems. And my question for Oregon is a question that I think will be overall important for the playoffs and kind of the future of the way it looks. Is this first round bye even going to be good for them? I know you might be wondering, yeah, well, excuse me, they get to rest and they get to study and they get to plan a lot longer technically a lot longer. They don't really get to individually plan because they have to see who's going to win. But I mean, I don't really know if I would want to be coming off of a week of or like 2 or 3 weeks of break if the team I'm playing just absolutely demolished a really good team and is looking to beat me. Like, I don't think Ohio State cares that they played an extra game. I think maybe you might have some people who are a little more banged up than will be on the Oregon side, or some people who are a little um, in need of some extra break this week. But I mean, as somebody who picked Oregon, I'm a little nervous. I think this is gonna be a really good game. It's a wonderful, wonderful scene. The Rose Bowl, Oregon versus Ohio State. That just feels college football. Like I think college football is, the MAC. I think college football is the Big 12. I think college football is the Pac-12, the West Athletic Conference, the WAC. I think it's I know that doesn't exist anymore, but I think all of college football is college football. But if there's something that feels just college football, like you know what I mean, Oregon, Ohio State, don't even worry about the championship. Like I'm not even worried about that. But Oregon, Ohio State in the Rose Bowl just feels like a football game. You know what I mean? So that's one that I'm really excited about. That I'm looking forward to, and we'll see if my prediction's wrong. I think as of right now, I'm 3-1 because I went with the three favorites outside of Penn State. And this next weekend, I'm definitely not going to be that because I picked SMU, and they're not going to be there. I'll give you a pick for that game because I'm not picking the rest of these games. I'm sticking with my picks because I feel like it's a little wishy-washy to change my picks after each round. But I think I'll give you the pick for Boise State, Penn State, because I chose SMU, who's not going to be there. So it doesn't, I'm obviously already wrong with that. And speaking of that Boise State, Penn State game, Penn State might have found their mojo. Alert. Every other team in the playoffs, Penn State might have found their mojo. If you look at the last two games they played, I mean, what they scored, I don't know how much. They scored 30-something, 39, 38 against Oregon, and they scored 38 versus SMU. Now, it wasn't all offense. Their offense kind of struggled for a part of the game, but they were still able to score 38. So obviously they have the easiest road to the playoffs. I feel like even if you love G5, even if you love the inclusion, you have to admit they have the easiest road, and this is another step on that easy road. And that's not to discredit Boise State. Boise State has the offense to win this game. They can win this game with the kind of offense they have. The question is, can they win this game with the kind of defense they have and with the kind of secondary they have? I think you're going to be playing in Phoenix, Arizona. You're going to be playing indoors. This is not going to be an issue like it was in the cold. I think Penn State is going to feel good being in warm weather, being indoors, getting the chance to just go out there and sling it around. I think if you watch them play against Oregon, you saw them grow in that area of passing the ball. And I think that there's really there's no suggestion that I feel like makes me think that Boise State can run on the back end with the Penn State receivers. I don't think, and like Tyler Warren, because if you saw Boise State, they were exploitable through the air. I mean, of course, statistically you could see it, but I mean, you could just watch and kind of tell. And those guys back there are dogs. You got to be a dog to play corner. One of the hardest positions in sports. And so I don't think they're going to care that they're, in the hundreds of, defensive rating or anything like that. I think they're going to come to this game and they're going to feel like they can do it. And Penn State doesn't have any world beaters on the offensive end. Like at receiver, they don't have a KJ Hamler like in previous years. But they do got a quarterback. Drew Aller struggled to start the game, and the longer that SMU kept messing up and kept giving him chances is exactly what he needed, because he just looked like he settled in right nicely once he knew that Kevin Jennings was not going to beat him. So with this game, I think that I've talked a lot about the Penn State offense versus the Boise State defense, but On the flip side, Ashton Junty's gonna have to do well. This is kind of like Scadaboo, like I was talking about earlier. He's one of those guys that doesn't care, the no logo and the strap that's on the Penn State helmet. He just sees a helmet and a player in it that he wants to run by. So I'm excited to see this. I think that if there's a player who can be the difference, college football and football in general, one player often does not decide the game. I think a quarterback has a chance to, but and then a running back potentially, or maybe a receiver. I think offensive players have more of a chance. Offensive players and D linemen, or defensive ends specifically, could take over a game at a given moment and kind of change the complexion of a game. I don't think any single player is usually going to win you a game, but when you have one of the best players in college football, like Ashton Junty, what he can do can give you a chance that you wouldn't have with any other person, and that includes Scadaboo at that position. So I think that that's going to be a fun matchup to watch. And if you're a Boise State fan, I'm sorry, but I've got to go with Penn State. I think that going with Boise State would just be Penn State haterism, or whatever you want to call it, hating, because I'm salty that they beat SMU, who was my Cinderella team. But I think after watching last week, I think that Maddox Madsen can, if he can improve on the things that Kevin Jennings made mistakes on. SMU had opportunities. If Maddox Madsen can be, which he's not exactly Kevin Jennings, of course, but he has some of the abilities on the ground, and he has some of the abilities through the air. So if he can be what SMU needed Kevin Jennings to be, he's got Ashton Junty backing him up, and he's got guys that will go out there and get the ball at receiver. So I think offensively they can run with them, but we'll just see, because if they get behind, it's not going to be one of those games that I feel like they're going to be able to lean on Junty as much, which doesn't spell good things for them. So I'm going Penn State. I'm probably going to say Penn State wins by, I'm just going to go with, I feel like 17 is a solid number. 17 Penn State. I feel like it's one of those games where it might be close going into the half, but I feel like it's one of those where Ashton Junty can't do everything, and even Maddox Madsen, who's pretty good, just won't be able to keep up, and he'll probably make some Kevin Jennings-like mistakes. And that takes us to the last game that's coming up in this next round of CFP. Really exciting slate of games, by the way. Notre Dame versus Georgia. If you saw what Notre Dame did to what was supposed to be a really good Indiana rush defense, you would come into this game and be like, I think Notre Dame can run on anybody. Well, I saw that, and I'm not that person that thinks Notre Dame can run on anybody. This game will be on the ground, decided by the team who wants it more. This is the most weight room game that you'll watch in the playoffs this year at all. You'll see athletes versus athletes. You'll see underdogs, David versus Goliath. You'll see environments versus teams over the course of a playoff. You're going to find a harder time finding a more mano a mano, foot in the ground, like head up football game than this Notre Dame versus Georgia game. And I'm pretty excited. Notre Dame ran well, and if I had thought they were going to run that well and only win by 10, I feel like I would be a little confused, because they got exactly what they wanted, but they weren't able to capitalize it as well. And I think this game against Georgia, I was talking about it earlier when I was reviewing the Texas versus Clemson game. If you watched what Georgia did to that Texas running game and you applied it, you basically looked at it and you're like, whoa, they did this in this scenario. What are they going to do Like, does that mean Texas just isn't good, or does that mean that Georgia is just imposing their will on them? And it was just Georgia imposing their will on them. Texas lost that game because they couldn't run the ball, and they won the last game against a top 20 team, who, I mean, Clemson was ranked 16 specifically, because they could run the ball so well, and they were just able to keep it out of Klubnik's hands, and they were able to make the big plays when it mattered. So for Georgia, I mean, I think that if any team is going to shut this Notre Dame down, or this Notre Dame run game down, it's going to be Georgia. I'm actually kind of confident saying that I think Georgia will stop it. It's actually not necessarily a super close game for them. They're going down to the Sugar Bowl, which isn't, I would say, like like I said, it's not the Superdome in Atlanta. So I feel like it's not going to be the most one-sided crowd environment, which playoff games usually never are. But I feel like this game is going to come down to whether or not the Notre Dame defense can give the Georgia offense issues like it gave the Indiana offense issues. The Indiana offense, I would say, is probably more efficient than the Georgia offense. Better is a loose term. It's a subjective term, and I'm not going to use it in this case. But based on the stats, people would say Indiana is a more efficient offense. And this Georgia offense, or this Notre Dame defense, did pretty well. And you might say it was the cold, and it definitely was. The cold did a lot of work, and the environment did a lot of work. It was an awesome environment, by the way. If you were upset about the weekend, I was watching that game driving up to Fort Worth from Waco, and I was looking at that environment, and it looked so fun. It was freezing. The crowd was pumping. They were playing Mobamba. They were playing all the songs, and it just looked like a fun place to be. But they won't have that this weekend. They'll be going all the way into the South, and I just don't think it's a good spot for them. I feel like this is the game I'm most confident in terms of one I already picked. The previous, like when I did my overall predictions. The only way I really feel like Georgia can struggle is, or at least give Notre Dame a real chance to maybe run away with this or win the game, is if Gunnar Stockton is just not ready to play. If that second half of Gunnar Stockton we saw was pure adrenaline, if it was pure reaction, if it was him not thinking at all, him not feeling any pressure, then he comes into this game and all those things weigh him down, then I could see a world where Notre Dame keeps the score real low. I feel like that's the key for them. Keep the score real low and find a way to win it in the end. So those are all the games for the upcoming round of the playoffs. And we got a lot of fun bowl games. Sadly, I won't be doing a show next Monday. Maybe I'll do one later in the week depending on what happens. And I'll hopefully be able to review a lot of bowl games based on the way everything goes. But yeah, so that's it for my college football playoff and general college football stuff. I'm going to move into my Big 12 corner segment now, and we're going to review the teams. I believe we're going through BYU, we're going through UCF and Cincinnati today. Not in that order, but yeah, so let's get started with BYU. BYU, I thought BYU should have been in the conversation to make the playoffs based on their resume, but I feel like they didn't really get any looks, which is a little reflective of the way that the Big 12 is perceived as of right now, and kind of the fact that the Big 12 is a little bit weaker right now. But, I mean, hey, if I'm BYU, this is my third season with over 10 wins since 2020. That's 3 of 5, I believe. That's pretty good, and I know 2 of those were spent not in, obviously, a Power 4 conference, but BYU plays solid competition. They're one of the more disrespected teams in terms of people think of them as G5 for some reason, but they're definitely not. they were definitely quality enough to be in a power conference before, and they're still quality enough to be in a power conference. And so their third season with 10 wins speaks a lot about the quality of that coaching staff and the potential for sustained success at BYU. I think the way that they were looking going into this year, I remember when Gary Bohannon was supposed to be the starting quarterback for this BYU team. As a Baylor fan, I was kind of looking forward to playing Gary Bohannon in Waco. And they were picked to finish 13th, and so I was kind of excited to play a bad BYU team in Waco. But what I got was Jake Retzloff and a good BYU team that started off 21-0 against us. And so I think the big story of this year was obviously the change on defense. They had a really good defense this year. They went from it says they went from 4th worst yards per game defense to the best in the Big 12. So that is a massive flip. I don't know what changes they made or what happened with that, but solid job. Credit to the coaches, credit to whoever was responsible, credit to the players too. They were not always like, I mean, if you're going to BYU, you're not always put in like a favorable light, I guess, as an athlete, because you're not going to be like the highest rated most of the time, unless you're BYU basketball. In that case, you're AJ, what's it, DeBen Santa or DeBen Stan, whatever it is, and you're a 5-star. But they get guys to do good work there, no matter what star is attached to their name before they arrive at the school. Yeah, and speaking of Jake Retzloff, people had their questions about him all throughout last year. Well, throughout the games he started last year and pretty much all throughout this year. But he just continued to play pretty well overall. I think that he obviously left some games where I'm sure he would have preferred different outcomes, like that pick he threw against Arizona State. If they don't throw that pick, they probably play Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game, and they probably go on to win the Big 12 because it didn't seem like Iowa State was ready for that game. But I think that, like, he's getting to those moments. I think if you were looking before the season and you asked BYU fans, would you be happy with 10-2? They would say, oh my gosh, yes. I mean, hands down, I'm putting in NIL money for 10-2 this year. But they get it, and they're a little disappointed because they started off 9-0 and they ended 10-2. And so I think you should be really happy if you're a BYU fan. You should be really excited about what you have potentially with Retzloff. I wouldn't necessarily say I think he's one of the top like premier quarterbacks in the conference, but I think he's definitely good enough where if you build a strong team like you had around him this year, you can go win a championship with the way the Big 12 is. And so I'm excited to see what they do here in the next couple years. But yeah. And so they finished second, tied for second. I think they technically finished tied for first. And then once the Big 12 championship happened, they finished they finished third or tied for second, something like that. Not entirely sure. But they're playing a pretty exciting bowl game against the Colorado Buffaloes, which would basically be a third place game. It'll be Arizona State, Iowa State, and the winner of the Colorado BYU game, which I think will be a fun one. I know that a lot of them were kind of sad that they're playing a Big 12 opponent, and I am kind of too. But once you get past that fact, I feel like it's a pretty exciting matchup, and Colorado's playing all their players, so you're really going to get to see what it would have looked like in the regular season. So that's going to be a nice weather game. It's going to be here, actually, in San Antonio, where I am right now. So, yeah, that was BYU for the season. And next on the list for the Big 12 was the team who was voted to finish, I believe, 14th, the Cincinnati Bearcats. This is a tough case for me as somebody who really likes this team. They started off so well. And I think, they barely lost at Tech, and they were so close to making a bowl game this year, but you weren't even thinking about that. At the beginning of the year, they were 4-1? They were 4-1 or 5-1 or something. they started off really strong, and then they ended on a 5-game losing streak to end 5-7. I think that if you're a Cincinnati fan, you should. I mean, there was no real big expectations for them this year, but the way in which that the season unfolded, you have to be disappointed, and I wouldn't blame you. I think it's not a bad thing though. Like, if you had said 5-7 before the beginning of the season, I know I said this with BYU too, but if you had said 5-7 before the beginning of the season, I don't think you would have been too mad. I think if I told you that Sorsby would look like your quarterback for at least the next 2 years, you'd be pretty excited, and you might be willing to deal with a 5-7. But the fact that you look like a Big 12 contender before you got into your big stretch of Big 12 games, and you barely lost to Pitt too, who went on to be pretty decent in the ACC, even though they were kind of fraudulent. Yeah, my heart goes out to the team because they just barely couldn't get it done. They played a tough one against TCU to end the year, and it was just not enough, which, you always feel bad when a team that you like one of those, obviously, so if I had to explain, it's like Baylor's my top team, and then I have a bunch of little teams down here that I'm like, if I see them, I'll root for them. And Cincinnati's one of those teams. And especially against TCU, I was rooting for them, but, it didn't turn out, and they ended up not making a bowl game. And I'm pretty excited to see what they can do, though, because I think before this season, people were wondering what Satterfield could do with the Cincinnati program. And I think you saw a glimpse of it in the first 7 games of the season, where they were 5-2. Yeah, 5-2. And they even beat Arizona State by 10 points. Really, I mean, if you told Cincinnati fans that they'd have Brendan Sorsby and he looked like the quarterback for the next few years, and they had a win over the Big 12 champion by 10 points, I mean, you'd be getting pretty excited based on the fact that they were supposed to finish in the bottom fourth of the conference. But I think it always makes everything taste a little sour when all the games you win or lose are back to back to back, and that's kind of the way that Cincinnati ended the year. And so the last team I'm touching on for Big 12 corner is the UCF Knights. The UCF Knights, I'm old enough to remember when UCF fans said they were going to come in and dominate the Big 12. Does anybody else remember that? Producer, do you remember that? I'm getting a nod no. My producer's not young. She just doesn't follow college football. But I remember when they said they were like a Utah, but coming from the G5. And they said that they were going to walk in and they were going to be the best team in the Big 12. And 2 years in, I believe they haven't gotten there yet. They have actually gotten worse. This is the worst season that UCF has had since 2015, when they went 0-12. Not in company you want to be in. Obviously, 4-8 is not nearly as bad as 0-12, and you're in a power conference, not the American, or not Conference USA. I'm not even sure which one they were in at that point, but either way, not what UCF fans want, and it's not what the administration wants, and so that's why they fired Gus Malzahn. Or actually, they didn't even fire him. He went to take a job at Florida State, which I don't know anything about that. I'm sure there was he left money on the table, so if he was doing a favor to UCF, it's very nice of him. But I wouldn't know what the situation was. Maybe he just felt like he needed a fresh start. But that gave UCF the opportunity to go out and hire Scott Frost again. Scott Frost had UCF as one of the most exciting teams back in 2017 when they claimed a national championship, which is still a weird thing, by the way, at least in my opinion. But I'm actually kind of excited for this. I think that I do have reservations about whether or not what Scott Frost did for, he was there for what, 2 years, 3 years. I mean, he was not there for that long, realistically. But what he did, obviously wasn't in a power conference, but so I have my reservations about whether or not that will be able to translate. Which coaches, you can translate anything to any level, and it could probably work as long as, obviously it's within the rules. It's just whether or not, whether or not his strategies will work with the current way that the Big 12 is going. And I think if there's anybody that UCF fans want, if there's anybody that a team wants right now, it's somebody who gets your fans excited and invested and willing to invest in the team. Literally, because the ability to go out and get transfer recruits, the ability to go out and get recruits in general is going to be a big determining factor as to just the baseline for your team. Because as of right now, with the way that talent moves around, you can flip from being mid to great. You can flip from being bad to great. You can flip from being great to horrible all in one off season. And when you're excited about a program like this UCF fan base seems to be, a lot can change, and a lot can change quickly. And Scott Frost has changed a lot quickly in previous years or in previous seasons where he was at UCF. So I think that this year you're kind of sad because you wasted an RJ Harvey year. RJ Harvey, very talented running back. You're not really happy about not being able to use probably one of the best talents that's going to come through your school, at least in a while. I mean, I'm trying to think of who's been better since Mackenzie Milton, which Mackenzie Milton's quarterbacking coach or doing the quarterback coaching at UCF. So it's just good vibes. I think if you were thinking about before the Scott Frost hire, you were really sad and lost as a program. After the Scott Frost hire, I mean, you got vibes. You got the good vibes. You're bringing in the quarterback who led you to one of your most, I think it was your most successful season in school history. So, I mean, really, it was everything that you want to have in an off season you've had up to this point, outside of just getting a bunch of recruits in the portal. So for me personally, I know I did a lot of hating on UCF to start this little UCF segment, but I'm pretty excited about what they can do. I feel like if Frost can transfer the successes of his tenure that happened before, I feel like there's no reason to think that UCF, who has all the capabilities of being a really strong team in the Big 12, can do it. And I feel like if you're a Big 12 team, it's all about just getting the right guy. I mean, we're going to talk about West Virginia in probably a few weeks, and they got their guy and they're excited, and Baylor football is excited about Dave Aranda again. TCU is a little bit, you don't know, but all that really matters is, are you excited about your team? Because when you're excited, the way that it works now, and the recruits and the attention's on you and stuff like that, things can get good real quick. And in a conference like the Big 12, where the team who was picked to finish last, as we talked about last week, ended up finishing first, anything can happen. So for UCF, for Cincinnati, I feel like there's always a chance. You got players and you got coaching staffs that can flip the script real quick. So that's going to do it for my Big 12 corner. I think that, like I said, I'm probably not going to be doing an episode next Monday. I'm definitely not going to be doing an episode next Monday. I'm probably not going to be doing an episode next week. I will see about maybe doing something later in the week after New Year's. I'm going to be at the Texas Bowl between Baylor and LSU. I'm really excited to be going. I'm going with the Baylor football team. I'm going to be obviously doing film for them like I've been doing. And so I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to a Big 12 SEC game, hoping that the Bears can get a big one over LSU, which has historically been a pretty good program. Thank you for Bleacher Report for all the videos that I was able to get today from the playoff games, all the highlights. I really appreciate it. And so with that, I'm going to close it off. I'm going to probably get something to eat, even though it's really late. And thank you all for watching, and God bless. Good night.